with me?
As usual, this is a one-man infiltration mission.
But Snake, you're a hero, aren't you?
I'm just a man who's good at what he does, killing.
The world needed men like us. We were valued then. We were desired.
On September 3rd, 1998, Metal Gear Solid was released in Japan for the original PlayStation. It follows from the previous MSX2 entries Metal Gear 1 and 2, but heavily expanded upon the story elements with much more room to do so on increasingly advanced technology. Writer and director for the series Hideo Kojima, a name you're probably familiar with, was able to give in to his indulgent love for film, including direct references and callouts to the action films of the 80s he adored so much, among other genres. But when you look at how much Snake was inspired by these action movie characters, his name and likeness taken quite directly from many of them, the overall campiness of the series begins to appear in full. From quippy one-liners to villains who never seem to die, the series, even before the wild ride, which was 2001's Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty, was one of absolute insanity. Snake fights against seductive snipers, psychic psychopaths, seething shamans, and spaghetti western wannabes, all in a single mission to save the world from a railgun-launched nuke aboard a mech that roars like a T-Rex and bears most of that name. Snake is very much fighting against and a part of ridiculousness itself. And yet the story is regarded by many fans as the pinnacle of fiction, a meaningful story whose name should be spoken with nothing but respect, even as it takes times away from these meaningful things to zoom in on an ass composed of PS1 polygons. So what exactly is the series? Is it a campy mess or something that we could all learn from? In this dichotomy, I think there is something which meshes. Metal Gear Solid is a series that wears its anti-war messaging on its sleeve, ending with a direct call-out for greater nuclear disarmament as stated in the START 1 and 2 treaties. It is, as is for Snake, a fight against ridiculousness, looking at war and the ideas which surround it and presenting them as they are, utterly nonsensical. In Kojima's indulgence, the twists and turns of the insane story he crafted, we find a quite clear statement about the kinds of characters in those movies he loved so much, about heroes, the ones who fight to survive against all odds, conspiracy, and lies, about the situations which craft them and what those circumstances really are. The very idea of the hero is just as absurd as Metal Gear Solid. I was much too young to appreciate Metal Gear Solid when I first saw it or heard it as a kid. My cousins were playing it, the second entry one room over, and I listened from outside since they quite rightfully determined I wasn't ready for the series' M rating. That's all the series was to me at first, the way to be closer to the connections which had always seemed to evade me, but had come so easily for everyone else. As an awkward child, I clung to anything other people liked, hoping it would make them like me as well. Years later, I would watch as my brother played the fourth entry in the series. He was allowed in that room all those years ago and was so familiar with it. It's a very different game from the original, a last effort of waning love from Kojima for a series he had intended to end years ago and was forced to only wrap up now. And as we know, even that didn't quite stick. What we see in that entry is not a muscular hero going one-man army to save the world from conspiracy. We see a beaten, broken old man fighting against other relics of the past, the shadow of a hero who once was. It's here that the series really started to become something more to me. I wasn't interested in the gameplay, nor in the connection I could gain through it anymore. I was interested in the story. I wanted to see how that hero I had heard so many years ago turned into this old, worn-down man now before me. So I went back and found out. I played the games not for anyone else, not to be loved, to find connection, but to understand something. I wanted to understand heroes. And I found out that Snake was never a hero to begin with, because they simply don't exist. With my own indulgent spiel out of the way, I can get to analyzing Kojima's. This franchise means a lot to me, so it seemed the only right place to start for my first analysis video on something that wasn't anime. I don't think this will be common, and I can probably guarantee you it won't do well, but in a lot of recent rough nights I wanted the comfort of one of my first narrative loves. So I do hope you'll stick with me through this one. The framework of Metal Gear Solid's deconstruction of the hero begins from its very first, seemingly mundane notes. As Snake approaches the mission from underwater, we're first greeted with a rendition of the opening bars from The Best Is Yet to Come, one of the most memorable songs from the series, and the one I wrote this whole script to. It's melodic and slow, a nice calm before the storm. When you think about how an action movie would typically open, probably blood pumping and fast paced to set a very specific tone, we get the first hint that not everything is as it seems. Beneath the action, beneath even the conspiracy and thrill, something branded almost like a James Bond movie as tactical espionage action, there's something much more calm, something quite meaningful and soft. This is quickly lost in the introduction to the mission's details, but here we find more building blocks to be examined. Colonel Roy Campbell, the mission commander and Snake's old comrade, gives a no-nonsense description.
Weapons and equipment OSP.
This is a top-secret black op. Don't expect any official support.
While it is a simple addition of plot dressing, that dressing is important. The fate of the world is at stake here. Terrorists, led by a black ops group Foxhound, have taken control of a government nuclear disposal facility and are threatening nuclear strikes unless their demands are met. And stopping that from happening in just 18 hours is one man without even any equipment or support. Because equipment is obvious. It has serial numbers and different things that can be traced back to a certain place, a certain unit, a chain of command that can be followed and blamed. If Snake were to fail, they'd know who sent him from that gear alone. Sure, his presence alone is enough to know, but not enough to confirm. If Snake dies on the mission, then they can claim he was just a rogue agent acting of his own will. So, to maintain secrecy, to maintain plausible deniability, he has to use only what he finds on site, things that can't be traced back to an official source. The fate of the entire world is at stake. This is a planned mission to prevent total destruction, and yet he is provided with nothing. Above all, the secrecy of who's behind this is more important than the fate of the world. They'd rather let it all go to shit than reveal who they are. Keep that in mind as we examine the man whose shoulders that fate is placed upon, Solid Snake. He's the hero of Outer Heaven and Zanzibar Land, the settings of the two previous games where he defeated Big Boss, the man whose remains are part of the terrorists' demands. In those previous missions, Snake defeated many fearsome foes, including the original and titular Metal Gear, a massive hulking machine of destruction, a heavy task for just one man. This earned him quite a heroic reputation in his early retirement, with multiple characters greeting him as a legendary soldier. Called back from solitude once more to save the world, he surely must be the pinnacle of military perfection, someone dedicated to business first and foremost. But his first instinct after we're informed of the mission's severity that it needs to be done in 18 hours is for him to hit on the operations team. Mei Ling is responsible for the mission data, saving the game when you call her, leading Snake to remark he didn't think a world-renowned data expert making military technology would be so cute. She even follows that she never imagined the famous Solid Snake would hit on her before getting back to business. This is something we'll see from Snake many times as the story progresses. He remembers Meryl, an imprisoned soldier who refused to go along with the terrorist plot, by her, well, backside. He snuck cigarettes into this top-secret mission by swallowing them since his stomach acid was repressed. Just one of his many wisecracks in what should be a very serious situation. And most notable, he admits that the danger of missions like this, maybe even the murder, is why he keeps coming back and agreeing to take them on, however forced. Psycho Mantis, a Foxhound telepath on side with the terrorists, digs this information from Snake's mind, and our main character agrees. Most directly, this point is reinforced by the number of times Snake is called a hero, like by Meryl and Octacon, an engineer who worked to develop this new Metal Gear under the false pretense it was strictly defensive, and Snake outright denies their claims, offering quite brute refutals.
You guys were real heroes.
There are no heroes in war. All the heroes I know are either dead or in prison.
You're incredible. Like a movie hero or something.
No, you're wrong. In the movies, the hero always saves the girl.
It's impossible to miss that, at the minimum, Snake is not what we imagine a hero to be. You think about them and think about grand speeches they make when asked about purpose and meaning and why they fight, but when Snake is asked, he speaks about simply continuing the mission for its own sake without considering the feelings of those asking, basically telling them to get on with it. There aren't heroic ideals behind his actions. He confronts rookies about how green they are, basically taunting them. He's kind of an asshole, quipping snarky like a discount action hero the whole time. This says something about heroes, given he's considered one. They're not a person, they're a situation. There's nothing in Snake which constitutes a hero. He and the terrorist leader Liquid Snake are genetic clones of Big Boss, a once legendary hero from the Cold War and the villain of the previous Metal Gear games. You could say this predisposes him to being a hero, but that's simply evidence they use to say he's a soldier and a killer, not specifically a hero. And if anything, that evidence they point to isn't the qualities of a hero, but rather simple manipulation. The secret program which bore the twin snakes was a government program always designed for experimentation and a safety measure against Big Boss. If Snake is drawn to combat, it's not because he's genetically disposed to it, it's because they ensured he would be so to test their theories. And Liquid, for example, grew up believing he received the flawed genes while Snake received the positive ones. However, the opposite was true. So their lives were a test of genetic manipulation, if someone could be molded into what they wanted despite all inherent conditions. And this is sullied by the fact that forcing them into situations changes all of the factors considering that. The genetic themes of Metal Gear Solid feed into the heroic ones. The factors of our birth influence us, but they are not us. Heroes are simply the situations that people are forced into. This manipulation goes further, as what he was molded into was a test of how to create a myth and legend, a hero. Snake is placed into the situation to be a hero, and that's all one is. There's nothing more to it. Because there's no sane reason to be one. It's awful. Look at how much Snake goes through. There's torture at the hands of Revolver Ocelot, mental abuse by Psycho Mantis, watching his newfound love bleed out, unable to help because of Sniper Wolf, not even mentioning the increasingly brutal and massive literal machines he has to fight, from tanks, helicopters, to literal world-ending engines of war. And this is all in one day. This is where the entries past Metal Gear Solid 3 really failed for me, as they removed the single mission element which displayed individual will so well. They endured so much in so little time, but kept going. By the end, Snake is beaten and bloody, almost dead more times than we'd like to count, even if he did receive a lot of help. He once retired into solitude for a reason. The work he did in only a few missions in Outer Heaven and Zanzibar Land was already a lifetime's worth of effort. Being a hero is powerful, but it is awful. With this reality, no one would wish for such a thing, so it is instead forced and coerced. It is ordered from across oceans and from behind computer screens by people with names on desks and not on tags around their neck. Where the truth is told in hushed tones and behind red tape, they know the reality of those who save the world. They know they die for their causes. And so those who wish to change the world in the long term, truly make their mark on it, they must do so at the cost of others, with legends and tall tales. To do so with one's own life is suicide. Heroism is nothing more than the abuse of individual will. I used to consider this series about such a will, how one person was able to overcome such tasks and keep going. But now I believe it's more about why someone would even need to do so to begin with. To look at that, let's return to the lack of support we've been keeping in mind. The reality behind Shadow Moses is not a nuclear disposal facility, but the testing grounds for Metal Gear Rex. It's a project greenlit all the way up the chain of command, as revealed in the post-credits scene to the President and Third Snake himself. In conjunction with Arms Tech, Rex was developed to grant the US a new top-secret advantage over the rest of the world. In this idea of nuclear supremacy, secrecy is key. When everyone has the power to end the world with the push of a button, you have to be able to end it first. So this new Metal Gear can launch warheads via its railgun, undetectable by traditional missile defense systems since it has no propulsion, and can launch from anywhere since it's mobile. But if this was known, it would be countered, and thus the cycle of military innovation would continue. We even see this in the next entry with an anti-Metal Gear named Ray once the specs for Rex are leaked to the entire world. Each innovation in weaponry is another step to world destruction once it's revealed. And notice that's military innovation, not just nuclear innovation. The latter is simply a result of the former. This applies to any and all weapons of war. Surprise is the best tactic specifically so that the enemy has no tactic. Secrecy is the ultimate weapon. When we witness exchanges like this from Campbell to Snake,
Just stop them,
Why should I?
because you're the only one who can.
it's not because Snake is special. It's because projects like this require the abuse of select few individuals to keep the hush-hush nature, to keep under wraps that the world could be ended at any time. A few individuals made to be strong are easier to control than entire armies and a lot less noticeable. The only way they stand out is after the mission as legends, because there's no other option with so much on their shoulders but to become the stuff of legends. Their drive to survive, to help others, or hell, even just to get paid, their individual wills to make it through become a new weapon of war by maintaining the secrets. A hero is simply a position of servitude, one which traps them into success at personal cost. I hate to lay it all on your lap, but you're all I've got, quote here. This statement is the point. You're all I've got, so you have to do it. You have to. It's a hedging of every bet, setting the conditions to try and get the ideal outcome. Heroes are amazing because they make the most ideal situations come true by force. And it's only because there's no choice. Told the world depends on you and you alone, would you be willing to quit? Think about it, there are two paths, one with a certain fate, and the other with uncertainty itself. And in that uncertainty lies many things, but that is the only one which includes the hope of survival. Saving the world is all a hero can choose to do. But also in there is something darker. Even once it becomes obvious he's being lied to, that is, forging into uncertainty, not knowing what he's truly fighting for, Snake continues the mission. He has an exchange with Octacon that goes like this.
What am I fighting for? What are you fighting for?
If we make it through this, I'll tell you.
Okay, I'll be searching too.
Now, Snake is a very direct man. For him to say something so vague only means one thing. He doesn't have an answer, which Octacon clearly understands by saying that he'll keep searching too. They're swinging wildly in the dark, unaware of what exactly is attacking them, only knowing that it must be fought off. In that moment, there is no time to think, to consider what the enemy is. To stop and think is to open a vulnerability, and against these odds, that means death. All of this secret nature of sending one person in, of putting it all on their shoulders, also means they can't be weak. They're forced to be strong. They're forced to continue. One quality of the hero is the ability not to fight for something, but instead for the idea of something, the potential. Not knowing if their actions are truly saving the world, but understanding how important such a task is, and deciding you have to do it just in case. Everything comes back to the phrase, no other option. That's what a hero's situation is. A lack of options. Meryl, Snake's love interest and rookie soldier on Shadow Moses, is woven into the story as an example of another side to heroics as well. Keep in mind where Snake started the story. He was retired in Alaska, living in the most remote place possible. He wanted to limit any and all contact he had, a simple, reclusive former soldier. But back home, he's something much more, outside of his influence and any input on the matter. Another reason for such secrecy on these missions is so only the positive details are returned. Not just the ones reflecting on those in power, but the ones used for that power as well. Soldiers are touted as brave souls whose honor and dignity allow them to face down insurmountable odds and survive. who found purpose and meaning on the battlefield, defending others from great evil. War is not near enjoyable, but is a duty done with heated and hearted passion. At least that's how it seems from far away when you don't have all the details. Do you think they mentioned that Snake enjoys killing in all the legends they told these new soldiers? Meryl was the daughter of a soldier who died in the Gulf War while she was still young. Raised on legends of the battlefield, given her uncle is Roy Campbell and wanting to understand her deceased father, she dedicated herself to following those footsteps. The ones of legends like Solid Snake. The ones falsely imprinted on the ground. She paints a tattoo of Foxhound at her arm as a symbol of this and follows through on becoming a soldier as her only goal in life. Yet when she's faced with human combat for the first time, she freezes, unable to shoot the foes charging her. Eventually she does, but only after being confronted and almost berated by Snake on the matter for their entire conversation, where he comments on things like her eyes, ones that aren't those of a soldier. Most of their interactions center around this point. Meryl is clearly capable, she can handle deadly weapons and later survive some of the same atrocities as Snake, both fearsome foes and sadistic torture. But she didn't start this way. She was forced to be like Snake. She was in this situation because of the legends like him. We get insight into this when she's used as a trap by Sniper Wolf, shot out in the open in the arms and legs, putting our leading man on a short clock as she bleeds out. Lying there close to death, she remarks what could have been her final words.
I wanted to be a soldier, but war is ugly. There's nothing glamorous about it.
She held an idea of combat that was contrary to its truth. It's not that she was unprepared, it's that she was prepared for something that was a lie. She was raised and trained to believe in legends and myths, the stories of men who had no input, the honor of war, the saving of lives, the duty and passion which carried great soldiers through the necessary deeds, a simple, easy vision of war. But by the time reality hits, when they're lying there in a puddle of their own blood, it's a bit too late to learn the truth. They're already forced into the heroic situation, the one which robs the individual of their life unless they comply. Another aspect of it is not being able to back out. Once you're in the heroic situation, you either live and become a legend, or die and are forgotten forever. Fighting not for nation or ideal, but simply to survive. For your name to be made something that isn't even your own choosing once the mission is over. The hero is not just false to the one it's based on, but to everyone. They're packaged and sold, convenient little truths passed around to breed the conditions for even more heroes to follow suit. More who can fight into uncertainty because it's the only option. I think this exchange that the Snake and the Colonel have about Meryl sums things up best.
She joined up of her own free will. I'm sure she was prepared for this.
Meryl thought she had to become a soldier. Thought it was the only way.
But we get another perspective on the hero as well. Not just the rookie, but the foes they fight. How far apart are our heroes and our villains? Snake and Liquid are brothers in more than just blood. He shares a kinship with the more deranged modern members of Foxhound, having a moment of connection with each after delivering a fatal wound in combat, save Ocelot, whose true connection to Snake is best saved for a different and probably 5-hour-long video to explain. But the others share stories of their past and who they were, how they came to be these villains. Psycho Mantis' mother died giving birth to him, earning him a lifetime of his father's hatred. Always able to hear inner thoughts due to his psychokinetic abilities, Mantis burned down his village and its inhabitants to be free from that hatred. Vulcan Raven's story is a bit more tame. Raised in the harsh climate of Alaska, he was molded most by Inuit traditions which promoted strength, and he became a natural warrior picked up by Revolver Ocelot rather than falling to some tragedy. Sniper Wolf was born in Kurdistan after the Second Kurdish-Iraqi War, running from place to place to escape death as a child, waking up the next morning to more and more of her family and friends dead. Big Boss saved her and trained her as a soldier, where she grew into the role of a lone sniper watching the world from afar, finally having safety even though she was still stuck to war. With Big Boss's death, she lived for revenge on the world. Snake, in seeing himself as anything but a hero, always allows their final words, always listening to their stories with a bit of compassion. I think it's because he understands something important. They're fighting just like him, but even more, they're actually doing it for something of their own. They're choosing to fight. That's why they're not heroes. It may be under the banner of Liquid Snake, but each member expresses their own wishes and desires to be gained through worldly power. And that power is the important note. The power of bombs and nukes, of developed countries and the leaders of them. That's the only thing that separates heroes and villains. Holding the world hostage under threat of nuclear detonation is the stuff of madmen. It is incomprehensible levels of destruction, the ending not of lives, but of life itself. No goal or ideology makes this a correct action. Liquid Snake is in the wrong. But why is he able to be? Shadow Moses' true purpose is the Black Ops development of Metal Gear Rex. The weapon they wield is one of the hero side's creation. Was the world not already held hostage by the absolute power of vision? With every possible country holding their own ideology and ready to strike at a moment's notice, are Foxhound's actions any different from the world we exist within? The difference between our heroes and our villains is not right and wrong. It is absolute power, the kind which wins wars and as such writes history, the stuff we all learn of power from. It is the perspective of those in charge and what they choose to share. Snake is able to relate to these villains so easily because they're the same, down to serving under the Foxhound banner he once did. They're similarly used and abused for others' wins. The only difference is that they're honest about power. They wield it openly, brandishing it for all to see. Instead of hiding in the shadows, they stand in the open, make demands, and try to see them through at the cost of their own lives. There is no right and wrong, no clear black and white here, but isn't that kind of boldness that they display something we'd normally consider heroic? I think there's even more of a line here, connecting through them serving in Snake's former unit, the legend factory that is Foxhound. Liquid Snake's ultimate goal is to see through Big Boss's dream of outer heaven, a world where soldiers are respected, revered, and of course, always needed. A world constantly brewing in hate to develop new wars for them to fight endlessly. A world where heroes are never cast aside for the false front of peace. As the nations of the world agreed to reduce their nuclear arsenals in public, in private they were complying only technically. Yes, stockpiles were reduced in sheer number of warheads, but what about deadlier warheads? What about new methods of delivery? Is 10 warheads any better than 100 if those 10 are 100 times more powerful? And in the context of our story here today, if they're atop the most egregious bastardization of science for war the world has ever seen. War has not ended with all of these treaties. It has only changed. It has cast aside the heroes of old for more convenient lies, ones which don't need to be controlled as people do. It is now data, technology, information. These people who gave their lives for causes were only now an annoyance, something to be controlled, harder than information. Liquid's idea of paradise is brutal and sick, but it is with reason. He is everything a hero should have been, down to the very same genetics as the one who fights against him. Yet Liquid is the villain, born into a world where he always would be. He is part of the same experiment as Snake. He is just as manipulated. A hero is only what they can be used for. A villain is the same, just liked a lot less. Liquid furthers this point by following the same lines as Psycho Mantis, speaking to Snake's nature on the battlefield. Actually, all of them do this to some extent, so let's look at how right now.
I've seen through evil. Now you're worse. Compared to you, I'm not so bad.
I wasn't waiting to kill people. I was waiting for someone to kill me. A man like you.
Each step you take is paved with the corpses of your enemies. You shall have no peace.
I think developing this mindset, this almost enjoyment, is a reaction to the abuse of will. If Snake really wanted to be a heartless murderer, there was no reason for him to retire away into the wilderness, to remove himself from the potential to be so. He would have stayed on the path of violence like Liquid. But when he's in these situations, he takes them on in full and without remorse. To some extent, he is a cold killer. He understands this and even uses it to fight the idea of heroism. When Mantis calls him as such in front of Meryl, he doesn't resist, instead continuing the narrative. He's a cold man who enjoys the thrill of death, both being on the verge of it and making others face it. This makes his utility for others into an exchange. It becomes, in a way, something to fight for, fighting itself. If you enjoy combat, then there's less of an issue with this arrangement called heroism. It's the one thing you can trust in a world full of lies, staring into the eyes of someone who's trying to kill you and fighting back. There's no dishonesty here, there's only will. Survival is selfish, and selfishness can quite often be honest. But as we reach his final confrontation with his violent nature, where Liquid calls him out, something changes. Snake disagrees. He can't provide a reason or evidence, but he wants to. He wants to find one. He's grown and changed over the course of the Shadow Moses incident. Even if he presents himself as a monster to Octacon and Meryl, he also tries to save them from becoming heroes themselves. When they insist on helping directly, he tells them to flee or hide, to get as far away from the matters of heroics as soon as possible. Meryl doesn't, instead she runs to them, going against his orders and paying the price for it. She learns what he knows in brutal fashion. And Octacon sees this harshness through Sniper Wolf's death, taking more of her approach and fighting from afar, from where he'll never be seen. The once cold, isolated veteran begins to care for these individuals, for Meryl retracing all of his steps, enduring torture, and defeating his most fearsome foe, all to save not just the world, but this one soul he cares for within it. He's not forging into uncertainty anymore, but rather setting aside the unknown for what he can see and feel. Love. It's cliche, but he finds a reason to push through it all, a way to put his abuse to use. I think with this in mind, his position in Metal Gear Solid 2 makes sense. He's no longer the legendary hero, but the villain, his name sullied and blamed for the next disaster, which is actually a Metal Gear production cover. This is because he was no longer useful as a hero, because he was finally fighting for something. He was not fully manipulated, so he was branded a villain, the same as the villains he once fought against. Anyone can be made a hero just as much as they can be made to be the enemy. It's a game of circumstance with no winners to be seen, one only of manipulation and convenient truths, a theme the rest of the series would go on to heavily cover. When it's only the situation and not the person, is there any more meaning to be said about heroes? Are we all one, or are none of us one? I don't entirely know. I'm writing this section completely without notes or an outline, and to be honest, I wrote most of this video like that, a way I haven't written in years. It felt fitting for this ending. Snake and Meryl survive the final battle and escape across the open vastness of Alaska, the sheets of ice connecting Shadow Moses Island to the mainland, presumed dead by some convenient lies from Campbell. They're entirely free, and that means that what's before them is uncertainty, the same thing that so often was used to abuse Snake before. But here he embraces it. When Meryl asks where they'll go, he only remarks,
I think it's time we look for a new path in life, a new purpose.
Will we find it?
We'll find it.
saying with certainty they'll find it before they ride off into the sunrise of a new day. The world is full of unknowns, and one of the few marks of a hero is the ability to fight through those unknowns because they have no other choice. In that way, we're all heroes. Our wills are all abused day in and day out. We all struggle against power and lies. We can all be made the villain once our utility is up. But we keep going. And when we find a reason to press into that unknown, we can drop the tragic label of hero. I think from everything Metal Gear Solid presents to us, it's clear that that would be a very good thing.